All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Backyard Banter podcast. My name is Matt Harmon. Still, that's 4 times in a row. It's still been the same name. And you know me from NFL.com, football guys, reception perception, all that stuff. But on this podcast, if you've been listening so far, you know that we're not really here to talk about football takes per se, but more so we're interviewing some of the most well-known people in the industry or in our community and trying to find out how they got to where they are, how their impact on the industry ended up being the way it was, and how we can help you guys find your way as well. And today we have a guest that I'm really excited to talk to, somebody that was really supportive of me when I was kind of a little nobody, and that's Rumford Johnny. So Johnny, how's it going, man?
It's going well, Matt. Hey, welcome aboard to, by the way, shameless plug, Draft Day Consultants, man. To a
Yeah.
newest member. Good to talk to you, man. I listen. What I love about what you're doing is so instrumental because you're really, I think, the fine example for anybody that's getting started in fantasy football to really look at. You're a younger guy. You really busted your hump. Putting out a lot of work out there, reaching out to the community, kind of being fearless about what you're doing, and people respected it. People respected the work that you're doing. I was one of those people that saw what you were doing with reception perception. I know the right now with the draft, there's a sort of somewhat of a split. I think people are kind of coming to the middle now, but I think there's somewhat of a split of the metrics and film community. And I think you kind of reason I really respected what you were doing is that you were kind of showing the work on the catch rates for some of these um, wide receivers and where they were winning and so forth and so on. And I respected that because it really kind of helped qualify what we were seeing on tape as well. And of course, with the combine just passing now, that we're seeing how everybody is measuring up in terms of explosion scores and so forth and so on, and all that we tie together, and we're able to kind of better understand why we're drafting so and so in our rookie drafts and why we're going to invest in them in our dynasty leagues. And those things are very, very important. I think what you've done and what some other people have done in other facets in the metrics community and in the film community, tying all those things together are important. And that's why I think that it's always good to listen to somebody that's new to the community or maybe just still sort of getting their feet wet, and they introduce something to you that kind of opens your eyes. And I've done this for a long time. I mean, I was playing fantasy football before Matt Harmon. Matt Harmon was in training pants, that kind of thing, and literally. And for me, to look ahead and say, wow, I love what this kid's doing, and it's important. And I'm going to share some of this because I think it matters, and I also think it helps me get better at what I'm doing as well. So we should never be closed-minded about what we're seeing out there in the community. We should always open our eyes to things and listen, put our ear to the ground. And social media has been fantastic. I wouldn't have known you. I wouldn't have met you. I wouldn't have talked to you. We wouldn't be having this conversation now had it not been for social media, which is fantastic. It's a new age. It's a new time for knowledge and understanding, and trolling, of course,
Yeah, right.
and some of the bad stuff. But we'll get to that. But for the most part, it's been really supportive, and I think that my role has always been sort of more of a I give the 10 fingers over the wall. Like I boost people up. I try to and give people a little bit of a push in the community, and that's always kind of the way I've been. I mean, I'm not the guy that's going to be writing 100 articles. The prolific people, God bless them. That's not me. I'm not the super numbers guy. I've always kind of concentrated on one thing and tried to focus on certain things. And for me, podcasting was a natural. I love it. I can't shut the fuck up. So obviously, this is a good
You
medium
and
for
me,
me.
you and me both. So we could go for a few hours here.
Yeah. So I mean, that's really was the natural for me because I love to talk about it because I always feel I can convey my thoughts better through speaking anyway. And so that's kind of why I fell into the podcast game. I mean, we started with two mugs. Prior to that, I had met Ryan Forbes, Rifo18 on Twitter, by the way, great follow, and a great fantasy golf follow, DFS, by the way. He's on Fantasy Insiders right now. He and I kind of sort of met on a different site, and then we started working together on a now defunct site. and just decided to start our own website, which became twomugsfantasyfootball.com, and then became obviously the podcast, which kind of took off a little bit in the community, which was great. I mean, it was just basically two people talking about fantasy football, well before the explicit rating was a thing. It was just two guys drinking beer and talking about fantasy football like they were at a bar, and that's kind of how it sort of sprung from there. And I was really always really comfortable and happy doing that, and we did that for 3 years and almost going on 4, and then life kind of took a turn and we did our separate thing, and then I did a year with Ray Summerlin from Roto World, and did the Rummy and Ray podcast, which was more of really a focused DFS podcast. So that's kind of where I was, and I've done some Dynasty stuff for Bro Jackson as well, and some non-football stuff for Bro Jackson as well. And that's kind of where I am. I mean, in terms of, the whole fantasy football community thing, just sort of being the guy that's just sort of on the fringe. I'm the guy on the couch, just kind of glazing over a little bit. Like, I'm just taking it all in. I'm not not the most prolific guy. I'm not the Matt Walden that's in the film room, like picking up all the nuances and stuff. But, I see it from my vantage point. I hope that people appreciate it and respect it, and that they're getting something from it. Some of my goofy rummy isms that end up being circulated amongst the draft community. I know, shout out to Josh Norris, who's always willing to prop me up for those stupid things, but it's just the way I see things, like I say, like, so-and-so is blah, 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 blah. If you drop a piano on his head, it's like a cartoon reference. Like, he's the same guy but he's shorter and more compact. That's kind of how I see things. And that's sort of my contribution to the community. I mean, as goofy as it sounds, it's just making it accessible for everybody, because I know there are some things that you hear from other people who are much more versed in scout speak and so forth. They're going to be able to tell you things that you're going to hear at the Senior Bowl, or at the Shrine Game, something like that, or even at the Combine. I'm not going to be able to speak like that. That's not where I come from. I'm more comfortable talking to you the way I understand football, the way I see it, and hopefully that's helpful to people. And that's why I love being part of Draft Day Consultants. Again, another shameless plug, because I'm able to help people with what I've learned over time, not necessarily, that I've learned it by the book, so to speak. Just learned it over time, understanding certain things and getting better at it, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and hopefully, imparting some of that wisdom to other people. So that's kind of where I am. And I mean, I've taken a little bit of a step back in the community, and just sort of, working with Draft Day Consultants, just doing that sort of thing and doing one-to-one stuff, but mostly just being a presence on Twitter and talking about the draft and all that, which I do love. And that's kind of my role right now. It's kind of a weird role, to help anybody out in the community, to say, like, how do you get started? I say get started by listening and watching everybody. And like I said, I focused on people that I thought were bringing something different to the table, and try to give those people a push, and connecting with those people, talking to them, having them on my podcast, and so forth and so on. And I think keeping that sort of community going, and the exchange of information is the most important thing, really, because that's going to provide you the opportunities down the line, I think.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That is how it all happens. That's how we all, like you said, in this weird little way in social media, that's how we all ended up being connected. And really, become tight that way, which is fun. It's exciting. And that's why, yeah, I always tell people too, like, when they ask me, how do I get started? Like, well, actually just get started. Like, get on Twitter, like, start, and it's always people that ask me, like, how do I get started? And I see they have, like, they follow like 100 something people. They have like 100 followers, and, they've tweeted like 500 times or something. I'm like, you got to get more active, man. You just got to get out there and just start talking, because people want to know. And that's another big point. We're going to go layer by layer, pretty much everything what you just laid out there. But one thing that you said that's really important is the idea of, like, nobody should be scared of the community growing. Like, it makes us all better when there are other voices out there providing unique content and everything. So I agree. And that's what I think so much like that's why I respect you so much, is because you do find those people and you prop them up. I was one of them. There's been others, and I think that's a really important role. And you still have a lot of influence. Like, you say you're taking a step back and you're kind of on the fringes, and that may be true, but like you still have like 12,000 followers. People still respect what Uncle Rummy has to say, So, but anyways, I kind of want to go back to the beginning there, and when you talk about playing fantasy football before I was like when I was in training pants, probably honestly before I was born, maybe. I don't even know.
Probably, yeah.
So, like, just talk about, like, when did you first fall in love with football and fantasy, and like, just how did that all get started?
Well, fantasy football really didn't become a thing for me until like the early '90s, I guess. Again,
So
when it
yeah,
was
right around when I was born.
yeah, exactly,
91.
right around when you were born. It was a workplace thing. Prior to that, I played through high school. Played Pop Warner, Pee Wee, all that stuff. Played football, loved football. Went to football camps and just loved the game more than anything. And for me, it just provided a really good outlet. I mean, I've written about this, and I'm going to get a little personal here. I know this is like a little bit more of a talk about you podcast, so I'm going to talk about me for a second.
Yeah, it's all about you.
I grew up a victim of child abuse, and I was an angry kid growing up, so I had an outlet. I needed to get rid of some of that rage, so I played a lot of contact sports. I boxed for 10 years, played football. Much better at boxing than I was at football, but still loved it. Still loved the game of football. So I just really loved it, and once fantasy became a thing, even on the most basic level before it became really popular, I was way into it. It was a work thing. Anytime there was an opportunity to start a league, I usually was the commissioner. I brought it forward. People were like, "What the hell's that?" They had no idea back then what it was, and I brought it up and like, "Oh, that sounds cool." And I took care of all the numbers, and back then you had to kind of write everything down. You had to kind of go into the newspaper literally, watch ESPN, take notes and all that stuff. And all those little things were how you created those leagues. That was nothing like it is now, which is way easier for people to kind of, less daunting for people to kind of get involved now. It's all so automated now. So back then it was a little bit more involved. So I think that kind of did help me getting involved in fantasy later on, because we did have to do some of the grunt work, really taking down a lot of the different stats and the notes and everything else, and have to log everything on paper. So you had to do some work. You just couldn't let it just happen for you. Oh, I'm going to pick so and so because that's my favorite team. You just couldn't be stupid like that and just join your work league and just get lucky, because you drafted so and so that nobody was, targeting, and you got lucky. They just fell to you. Oh, that you were auto drafted Julio Jones. Like you can't get lucky like that. Now it's much different now. It's much more nuanced. Fantasy football has so many different variations now. We have leagues with super flex leagues and stuff like that, where you really have to pay attention. Back then it was like, it was pretty basic. It was a standard league. PPR wasn't even really part of the discussion until we started talking about maybe we should value receptions in these leagues, and that things sort of happened and got better and better, and the internet came along, and we all started to play Yahoo fantasy football, and I was like still one of my longest running leagues for work. It was a Yahoo league that I was in up until like a couple of years ago. And once you got into that, it was just sort of an every year thing, a bonding thing. Everybody kind of assembled, and you didn't have to all be in one place. You just be at your computer and chatting, and it was a cool way to bond with people that maybe some people that you didn't see for a while. Maybe they moved away, but they were still in your league, and it was sort of an interesting way to kind of hang out with your friends and draft that one night, and then be in a league and kind of communicate with them. And then it just sort of become much more involved now, where we are now, where it's like really an industry now. But back then it was just a cool thing to do, and that's kind of why I got into it. It was just a fun thing to do with people from work, and then it became a little bit more involved in that, and then it became how many year-long leagues are you in, and then obviously it's now transitioned to different stuff like MFL 10s and DFS, and it's become so much bigger now than it was to start, and it really is. It's a money-making industry. I mean, I'm talking to you. You have a job now in the NFL because this is huge, and it affords you that opportunity to be able to impart that knowledge to people, and because it is so popular now.
Yeah, it's incredibly popular, and it just blows me away, like how much interest is in it, even just from like when I started playing like 8 years ago, when I was in high school, and or maybe 9 years ago, whatever. But anyways, so yeah, it's crazy, and like you kind of mentioned there, it definitely went through a big transition. It's becoming more popular. What made you, like as an individual, want to take more of an active role in fantasy, to the point where like you kind of put yourself out there and like started like being an analyst instead of just like I play in a ton of leagues and everything?
I think it's just like anybody else. Like like I honestly like was when I was part of a pay site at the time. I had been active for a long time, but I became part of I was a subscriber to Fantasy Guru, the John Hansen site, and a long time ago, and I was on the message boards, and I know that the owners, John and some of the other guys that write for the site, and actually I'm friends with those guys now, Joe Dolan and everything else. They look at the message boards, for people talking about topics, because they're always there to try to improve the product, but they also are there to mine for new talent for the site. So, I was asked to join, the site. And at the time, being, just having just started in I've worked in the medical field with people with disabilities, and I know that you had for a short time as well. But I've been doing that now for, God, 20 plus years now, 25 years or so. And I was just starting to elevate my status in that job, where I was asked to do more. It was consuming so much more of my time. And I've always been that guy. I can write so much, and I just don't have the time to sit down and really burn that, that midnight oil, because I have midnight oil burning for my work stuff. And for the day job. So I always focused on, paying the bills and paying the mortgage and being smart in that sense. And I was approached by John, asked me if I wanted to write for the site. And I was flattered, and I just said no. And I couldn't at the time, but I thank you so much. And I kind of kicked myself a little bit for not saying yes at the time, but I don't know where my life would be now if I had decided to just do fantasy football writing. It might have taken a different turn. Um, and I don't regret that at all. I said no to it. And then of course the opportunity from that onto other sites, into a fantasy league where I ended up meeting Ryan Forbes, then became the opportunity to start our own writing gig, and our own website, and do that and just put it out there. And that was sort of comfortable for me because I was able to do so many articles per week. We each sort of divvied up, like, you do this, the rankings, and I'll do this, I'll do the waiver wire, and blah 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 blah. And that's exactly what we did. It was super basic, but it caught on, and people liked it. And at the time, it was exactly what I could do. And I said, well, why don't we do a podcast? Podcasts are starting to become popular. At the time, it was just still a burgeoning thing. It wasn't like hugely popular, but I'm like, let's do a podcast. And we did one, and it took off, and people were really cool about it. It was always kind of, in terms of the fantasy football podcast, was always in like the top 20. I mean,
Right.
for a little rinky dink mom and pop deal, we somehow managed to have that many followers and listeners, and I was blown away and flattered, and felt great about it. So that was kind of what I can offer to people out there that are listening, is that do that, do exactly that. Like, start something, like start your website. I mean, what you did, Backyard Banter. I know our buddy Davis Maddock, started Sports Wonderkin. He did that, and people, that have their own, website, or their own blog, and they start out writing about stuff, and they approach somebody, and they get things, they catch on somewhere else, and maybe they're writing, you know for a little bit for Roto World, maybe a little bit for 444, maybe they're doing a little bit over here for football guys, and bits and pieces, and that's kind of how you get started, and that's how you get noticed. And working hard, put your nose to the ground, being polite, and being cool with people on the internet goes a long, long way, because there are people that aren't very kind to people, that spit on other people's work, that are going to always be in that plateau. I'm not special. I don't do anything. I haven't written anything noteworthy in a long time, but I still manage to be able to have conversations with people, and still be able to have my word respected, because I haven't, tried to trip anybody up. I'm not. That's not my point. My point is always to, if you can't, the old golden rule: if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. If you can't elevate somebody, then get out of their way. That's kind of how I look at it. So, be a good citizen in the community, and people will like you, and respect you, and your work will stand out. Like your work stood out. Like I talked about Davis's work. Guys like TJ Hernandez and Chris Raybon over for 444, and our buddy, Rich Rebar at Lord Reeves. He's done amazing work to me, and those are the types of things. Kevin Cole for Rotoviz. I mean, people that are just doing blindingly fast, like prolific, intricate work that you should be paying attention to. And not that everything that you do should be taken as gospel. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that pay attention, because there's so much out there, and take some of that, and put impart some of that wisdom, and form your own opinions, and start your own blog. I mean, start your own idea. Come up with something on your own that is unique, maybe a little bit different from the norm. you know People saying, being contrarian is like, well, sometimes you're just trying to veer so far from the norm that you're just trying to get noticed. Yeah, of course you are. It's exactly what you're trying to do.
You have to
Sometimes
do that,
you have
especially in
to.
this industry when all the content is so like we talked about this with JJ last episode. Like nobody cares about your rankings because you're nobody. You got to have
Yeah,
something that stands out.
exactly. I mean, if you do something unique, um, like Sean Siegel, zero running back, and stuff like that. You do something unique that people like, oh wow, that's interesting, and kind of veer from that. Or maybe you take away something from, an experience that you had. Like, I was talking to somebody the other day, and like, oh, we're doing MFL tens. I'm not drafting tight ends until the very last, in the last 6 rounds. Like, I'm not touching them this year. Why? It's because such a cliff. If you draft Gronk early, if you draft one of the big tight ends early, and then it's like a huge cliff from there. So why bother wasting time on that when you could be stacking up wide receivers, and then getting somebody that maybe is 20 points lower at like 6 rounds, 7 rounds later, than
Right.
that tight end, and stuff like that. Like, you just takeaways, like, say, well, what's your sample size? Well, my sample size is I played, 50 MFL tens. That's plenty. Like, if you played 3, then your information means nothing. But if your sample size is significant, then you're taking away something. You're extracting some information that, hey, wow, this came to mind after I looked at this from last year, and boy, my best teams now are all teams that I drafted a quarterback in rounds 9 to like 11 or 12, and then tight end like 14 to 16, and then drafted all my defenses last, and didn't care about anything else, and blah 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 blah. And if you do something like that, and you share that information, then maybe people will get better at it the next time they get into one of those MFL 10 situations, because most of the time people just don't care. They go in those
Yeah.
leagues, and they draft. Oh, that's a name I remember, and I draft that guy, and they don't have a structure or rhyme or reason. I'm trying to think of who it was that was on Evan Silva's podcast, Eaton podcast, not long ago. But he is the most efficient MFL 10 player last year, based on how many he entered. I think he won like 15 leagues, and he had entered 40.
Right. Yeah. It was.
Which is absurd.
I can't remember his username.
I'm sorry, and I apologize to him because he's super prolific, but just the way he was talking about it's like that. He just made a ton of sense. Like the things that I don't draft any rookies. Like,
right.
Why not? You see everybody draft rookies. They get excited because the combine comes around. I'm going to draft Josh Stockton. I love Josh Stockton. He's my number one wide receiver this year, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, but
I think something that you're hitting on here, and this is what I always tell people, like regular fantasy players when they're drafting, and then it also applies to people in the industry that are coming up with these unique kind of maybe contrarian sort of models, and maybe people don't respect it right off the bat, but it's much better to be laughed at in August than at the end of your league. So take that risk if you have an idea. Start spreading it, and if people don't accept it at first, and then by season's end they're like, oh hell, like he was right. I mean, perfect example was being like, and I was talking about this on a podcast. I think it was on the Dynasty Blueprint podcast I was on this week, talking about like disliking Devontae Adams in August this year was tough, man. Like that, like, and I was like king of that castle. Like I didn't want to touch Devontae Adams at any point in his price, but then lo and behold, he goes out and has a terrible season. They're like, oh, well, maybe Harmon knew what he was talking about. So just because it's tough at first, you have like a contrarian idea like that. Don't be afraid. Be bold,
You're talking to the guy that was on Devonta Freeman Island.
Right, for sure.
In Dynasty last year. And I wrote an article and was like, a lot of people gave me crap for it. And, a few people made a point to like cast a big spotlight on how stupid my take was.
Yes.
But it turns out that it was right. And it turns out that this year everybody's telling you to draft him now. And that he's like, even though they can't stand him and that he sucks at football, he's super efficient in what he does for that offense. So you should draft him. Well, that's kind of what I was trying to tell you last year. And that's
right.
sort of like, what you should really be taking away from people that are kind of giving you that idea like, hey, don't look at the shiny object necessarily. Just kind of look at the thing that's closer in the mirror, the rearview mirror. That's something that you can actually grab and say, this person will probably be more helpful to you because they're going to have a larger role, because they're established, because they have a rookie that's breathing down their neck. They're probably going to try harder, and that you actually believe a little bit in their talent. And that's kind of the point. Like, we get down to dynasty drafts we're talking about. People are excited about rookies. There are a lot of guys, second-year guys, third-year guys, that are going to be, pushing themselves now to play better. Maybe potentially in contract year, some guys, maybe a fourth-year guy, that you're going to see come out of nowhere and suddenly be beneficial to you that maybe people aren't talking about because the shiny new object is right in front of you. And that's that's the par for the course. I mean, we get excited about that fresh blood, and we obviously want to see these young players succeed, but there's also that point that historically we know that only a small portion of them are really going to exceed expectations. Most are going to be okay, but ultimately, if you put them side by side with, say, a wide receiver 3 or 4 or running back 2 or 3, they're not really exceeding those numbers. So why invest so much because it's a name, because it's, Derrick Henry, why do that when Chris Ivory, who could end up in a really great place, could blow him out of the water next year?
Yeah, I think. Sorry,
go ahead.
Keep going.
No, go ahead.
Well, I think one thing that you're kind of talking about here, just noticing in how you're explaining some of these fantasy situations that I think is really important, and you talked about this earlier, like, you're not like sitting here giving out any advanced analytics or any advanced stats like that. Like,
no.
You very much go off like what you feel, like what you think, and intangible things like what the dirty word of like narrative or whatever, like guys pushing
I'm Captain Narrative, dude. And I know I'm shamelessly captain narrative, and I don't care because,
Right.
again, I'm not going to show you a spreadsheet that shows you history, but I'm going to tell you, go look back and see last year how many rookies exceeded expectation, or how many rookies gave you this, in comparison to a third-year wide receiver, or how many rookie tight ends really jumped off the map last year.
Yeah, and my point of bringing that up is like I think that people, especially now with analytics becoming more and more popular, and so many people like with all their numbers, and I mean I'm definitely guilty of a ton of numbers in my work and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
I think a lot of people get intimidated by that, and they're like, oh shit, I can't do any of that, so I'm not going to get started. But I think you're a good example of somebody that people, like you said, like Josh Norris, other people in the industry really respect, just your instincts and why, and like that's important, and that's something that Sigmund always talks about too, is like narrative, and Cecil too, both of them on the show. Like I always talk about, narrative belongs in fantasy football analysis, and I think that that's something that I definitely think you impart to people out there, is that like you can have a voice, you can have a respected place in this industry. You don't have to just be like a numbers guy. So if that's not your thing, like don't worry. There's other, there are other avenues to take to get your voice out there.
Right. And listen, I'm like I said, I'm open to every aspect of this community. Obviously, my mind is open to metrics. I wouldn't even be, on this podcast if I wasn't talking about metrics, because part of what you do in reception perception is really metrics. It's percentages. It's a metric. It's a metric. So, that's something that I noticed and I was aware of. So I appreciate that, and I take that in, and I use some of that knowledge to what I want to do. And great example is Josh Doxson. I started watching Josh Doxson, and looking at his games and looking at him winning big and small contested situations, running slants, running deep routes, and immediately at this point right now, I mean, I'm still looking at players right now. He's my wide receiver one now. Here comes the combine. He tests off the charts, and everybody's like, wow, Josh Doxson. Had not really thought of him in that way. It was always Treadwell and some of the other players, and they hadn't thought of them that way. I'm like, for me, it's not an I told you so type situation at all. It's a like, oh, good, I just confirmed what I saw. And the explosiveness laterally, some of those things, like I see him winning small as a small receiver on the slants and being able to sort of juke defenders out of their cleats, that sort of thing that's visual to me. I can now, correlate that because he's testing really well in some of those drills, some of those lateral drills, like the 3-cone and so forth. Some of those things are showing up. The explosion, I can see him winning the 50-50s. The explosion shows up because he's able to sort of win in those 50-50 situations. So those things are showing up as well. When all those things tie together, then you feel better about people that you're trying to tout. And as the years go by, I feel better about those things, because sometimes you have to, and I talked about this with Josh Norris, make those leaps of faith. Sometimes guys like, Odell Beckham, where again, island, sentiment last year, where what he was able to do with that small sample size or smaller sample size, I thought, I don't see anybody doing this. He was just so unbelievably physical, and so athletically gifted. And when he did make catches, it wasn't something you could ignore. And that's why, I wish I had really even pushed him even further, but I kind of fell into that trap, with the Evans and guys that I loved anyway already, and guys that I still like anyway, and the Watkins, because of the draft capital, but guys that you really love because of the way they jump off on film, and like, man, this guy's going to be a superstar. And I pushed him really hard. And again, it wasn't a popular opinion at the time. And he turned out to be a really great wide receiver. Now, sometimes you miss. Sometimes you prop up a player that, doesn't work out, that maybe it's not, you didn't bullseye. Maybe it's something that you missed, or maybe something because of where they landed. Maybe they're not being utilized correctly. And those things all, play into it. But it's, it's good to understand that we can't write the history of a player in one season. We can't. You have to give them some time. 2 years, 3 years. Year three, if they haven't done anything and they haven't made a mark yet, it's safe to kind of like say, okay, I was wrong about this guy. But I mean, if you give them a year, you give them 2 years. Sometimes running backs don't really put everything together in the puzzle until 2-3 years down the line. It happens, but I think for the most part, within 2 or 3 years, you should be able to see what you saw early on. It should all come together. It should all make sense, and that's kind of where I'm at. I think that that's the important part. I mean, by just looking at sheer numbers, you're often going to fall for the trap of this guy is, he just blew up in college and this and that, and he exploded at the combine, put up great numbers, or his pro day, put up great numbers. I'm buying, and that's where I can't completely buy into the metrics argument if that's all you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not looking at how they win and so forth. I think the combine drills are interesting to me because the explosion drills matter. The straight line speed matters to some extent. If you're at a 4.5 or so, or maybe a little bit beyond that, it's fine. Below that's great, but if you're not winning, you're dropping a lot of passes, and you're not basically, winning intermediately. You don't look smooth in and out of your routes. Then it doesn't matter. If all that doesn't tie together, it doesn't matter. So all those things are important. So we see like the gauntlet at the combine. Guys catching passes. You see what you see on film already with certain guys who catch smoothly and transition from the catch to just not looking stiff and rigid out of their break. All that shows up in a drill. It's like it's amazing that you can see that and say, I saw that on film. This is what this guy looks like. This guy shakes people out of their cleats. This is what he does. And so it shouldn't come as no surprise to you. And these are the kind of things that you should take away and try to impart some of that into your metrics as well, because if you do, you're going to be a little bit better at this, I think. And again, I'm not looking at spreadsheets every day. I'm not looking at all those numbers and trying to look at every game versus this common opponent and all that stuff. Sometimes that can it can bog down your mind a little bit and really kind of get you clouded on, is this person actually very good?
Right.
And some of those things are, can kind of take you off the road a little bit, off to the side. And I think that's something that you have to be concerned about. But I think some of that also is very, very important. Like somebody that, didn't like have many yards after the catch, they didn't force many, they didn't break many tackles. All that matters because you're not always going to land in a situation where you're going to have great blocking for a running back, or you're not going to be in a situation where you're going to be facing off man all the time, like in college, with a lot of these wide receivers who are big time wide receivers, they face a lot of off man, or zone coverage, and they're breaking off these big passes and for yardage and everything else. But in the NFL, they're going to get busted up. They're going to get pressed, and they're going to get pressed and get pressed and pressed and pressed, and they're not going to look like the same wide receiver, at least not right away. So you have to think about those things. You have to consider those things that you won't see, in anybody's stats or on a chart. You're not going to see that because unless somebody's charting that, unless somebody's charting like you did, which is great, and I laud you for it because I know you've been posting in reception perception, guys that are facing press coverage and zone coverage. That matters. That matters so much because the guys that are winning when they're getting roughed up, getting pressed all the time, those guys are going to ease into the NFL much easier because they're not always going to face off man, especially if you're not fast. If you're not a fast wide receiver,
Right, yeah.
no, why should anybody respect you if you're not fast? You have to have all those other skills. You have to be able to win intermediately and have those movement skills to make people respect you. Otherwise, they're not going to. So they're going to press you. If you can't run, they're going to jam you up the line all the time because you're not going to separate deep from them. So all those little things are so important. So I laud you for that, because I think that is another component that people really should be focusing on.
Well, I certainly appreciate that for sure, and it's definitely why I do it, because I think it matters, and it's like you're talking about here. There are multi layers of processes and different things that people bring to the community. We all have such a diverse approach to this, and I think that's what makes it great. Like we were saying at the top, that's why we always are looking for and welcoming new voices, because it makes us all better. One thing I think that you were talking about earlier, and I think has been a theme kind of on the same track, has been a theme through all 4 episodes, is like propping other people up, like not being, just don't be an asshole. Like that seems to be something that is important. And I agree with you. Like you're saying, just being kind to people is how you get yourself out there and how you get people to respect you. Like, was there ever an example for you where that was difficult, or like tough to remain kind, or like why is that so important to you in interactions?
I don't think so. I mean, listen, I'll be honest. Like, if somebody's unkind to me or disrespectful for no reason, and like without explaining why they're unkind, I generally block them
Yeah,
on Twitter.
you're well known for
Yeah,
a quick block trigger.
I'm quick block. Yeah, and listen, I don't apologize for that. It's not real life. I mean, there are
Right.
people that I've met, and I'm happy that I've interacted with outside of social media. Some of the people that I interact with on Twitter and so forth. I'm glad that I get to meet those people, and they're nice people, and they're people that I want to spend time with and drink beer with and share a laugh with. But there are
Beer's
people that
good.
are all. What's that?
I said beer is good.
Yeah, beer is definitely good. But there are also people that I just listen. I talk about this, and I'm not a tough guy, but I spent a big part of my life punching people in the face as a boxer. So I don't want to be in a situation where somebody that was unkind to me on Twitter says, "Hey, there's that," in a drunken bar fight, and I drop somebody. I don't want to have to do that, but
Mhm.
I try to avoid those things. I'm old. I have property now. People can take shit from me. I don't want to do that. Uh, so that's how I feel about it. So for me, there were moments like that, and I just avoid those people. I block them and whatever. If somebody, I'll say outright, if somebody said something horrible, and these are my precepts. Listen, I'm not a bleeding heart. I'm not politically. I'm right in the center. I'm not not left or right, but don't make fun of somebody that can't defend themselves.
Yeah.
Don't make fun of people based on race or gender. Uh, you know, whatever. Their lifestyle. Don't make fun of that. If you do that, then I block you. And then if you say I'm an asshole because I blocked you, well, then go look through your fucking timeline. And if you were a dickhead to somebody, then maybe you know why I fucking blocked you. So
Right.
that's kind of how I approach it. I'm not trying to be a tough guy. That's just I don't need to see that shit on my timeline. That's all. I don't have to. It's not like real fucking life. I'm not in that line at the bank. I don't have to deal with the guy that farts in front of me because I'm waiting to get my check cashed. In real life, I can block the guy that farts. You know what I'm saying? Like on Twitter, I can do that. I can block the farter. You know what I'm saying? Like the
Yeah.
verbal farts. I don't have to deal with that shit. So that's how I look at it. And so it's been rare. There's been a handful of those things that have happened. But for the most part, people are awesome, man. People are fucking great. And they're kind. They care about what you have to say. That's the greatest thing in the whole world. I mean, people that say that, hey man, your podcast rant was hilarious, but it made me think about this and that. That's all I care about. I'm like a shameless, like frustrated stand-up comedian. So if I can crack somebody up but also make them think, I'm like in heaven. So that's for me, that's a great thing. And I've loved doing that. And that's kind of one of the things I'll miss about not doing a podcast all the time, because I, can't like, have that audience, um, but those things don't really drive me every day. I don't wake up thinking about this person who was mean to me on Twitter. Like I don't care. I mean, I wake up, because you worked in this field before. I work with people who are profoundly disabled,
Right.
and their lives are so much more challenging every single day. And I wake up and I, help them, but then I go home and I know that my life is never going to be as tough as their life. And so
Gives you perspective, man.
total perspective, and again, just to so when somebody says something stupid, it's like it's comfortable for you behind your little keyboard and your screen to say something dumb, which you'll have no repercussions for because Elmo is your fucking avatar and you don't have to deal with me. You know what I mean? So, and I love Elmo, by the way.
No,
but if you're an
hate
asshole, you have like evil Elmo, then fuck you. But no, I mean, just if you don't have to deal with people one-to-one, then just don't do that. That's just how I approach it. Like if treat people the way you want to be treated. It's such the basic golden rule aspect of life. If you're doing that, you're proof that happens to good people. You got an opportunity, you did good work, you weren't a dick to people, you were kind to people propped you up because you were smart and you were also a good guy, and that helped you out. Mike Clay, same thing. Mike's just a fucking grinder, and Mike's never been a douche to anybody on the internet, and look where Mike's going now, ESPN.
Seriously.
Anybody. I mean, in examples, Evan, anybody that's ever given a leg up to people and, has never been a dick to them, it's different to like kind of playfully jab and have fun with people. We constantly do that within the community, and that's one thing. But if you're a jerk to me, then I'm going to be a jerk to you. I mean, if you're nice to me, I'm going to be nice to you. I mean, I get, you get a lot of mentions during the day. Of course of the day, I try to talk to a lot of different people and respond to if I can. I am at work, during the day, so it's hard for me to constantly respond to people. So, but if it's a unique, funny, especially if you're funny. So I'll say this to your audience. If you tweet something funny to me, not a douchey funny, but like funny thing, then 9 out of 10 times I'm going to reply, and I'll usually favorite those because, I'm a comedy freak. So I anything funny that I'll definitely jump all over it. But that's great, man. That's why we do this. That's why we interact. I mean, I know you've had a lot of really wonderful, engaging people on this podcast so far, that have been wonderful examples of how to react and interact to people on Twitter. And that's a great thing. That's to me, that's what this is all about. I mean, this is the age we're in. If you're able to help people, then do that. No matter how you do that. If you retweet that's why people say, why do you retweet that fucking article, man? It's just something good about that dude. He sucks. I'm like, because it's well thought out and that dude's my friend.
Right. Yeah.
Even if you disagree with it, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you hate it. I'm not like it's not like Donald Trump. Like I'm endorsing Donald Trump. Like I'm endorsing the hard work that this person put into it. I may disagree with them, but
sure.
I'm giving them a push because I think they put a lot of work into something, and to completely nod in agreement in unison like a lemming with somebody, on a specific topic is ridiculous. I mean, that we would never get better at what we do if we all had groupthink. And that's such a dangerous thing, is to like all just say, yeah, because you'll look back at your fantasy failures over the course of the year. You'll look back at 2015, say, where did you fuck up? You'll look back, you'll see exactly where you fucked up. You'll say, I didn't listen to the people who told me Joseph Randall was a douchebag and a bum. You know what I mean?
Right.
Those people, like, I should have listened to those people or whatever. Like, I mean, just as an example, I mean, any player that like, no, don't burn the tires in a pile over this player because he's just going to fail. And there's a dozen people say, no, definitely going to get him in round 3. Do it. Get him in round 3. Like, stick to your own.
It's when you do those things that like, oh, well, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is saying it's okay. Like,
yeah, it's like a PSA for smoking, man, or something.
Yeah, right. Come
on, man. You want to do it, bruh.
But, I think one thing we were talking about earlier, like just helping other people, man. It's like this. My generation gets shit on all the time. Like everybody lines up to take shots at millennials, which like as a millennial gets a little tired. But I think the one thing that is great about this generation, and not just my group of people, like people that are my age, but like guys like you and Waldman and Sigmund that are older, but like interact with us so much and are so much like up to date with what the hell is happening in the world, like on social media, is like. We're a very proactive generation. I will say that. And like this podcast, I think humble brag or whatever, but it's very much like a millennial thing. Like, I see something where I can help other people and I just do it. Like, and I think that is something that defines our generation. And it so much comes out in the fantasy football community. Like, because there's a lot of good people there. And you said this earlier too, like, people that are negative and that, try to step on other people or tear down other people's work. Like, believe me, you'll find people that think that's cute and like gravitate to you being an asshole to other people. And like, don't worry, because there's plenty of other assholes out there that think that's cool and all. But you said it earlier, like, you definitely have a plateau. Like, you will have a ceiling, because people, like, in a large sense, just do not respond to that. And I think that's really something that's important.
Yeah, or people just will not like realize that these people are, imparting some kind of negativity on the community, or maybe, because that person is like super, up there, what, like always, trying to connect with them or whatever, or friendly to them, however you want to describe it. Maybe that other person doesn't see that of that person, those sort of that ilk of trying to break people down or trying to destroy someone else's thought process because they don't agree with it. Like, it doesn't fit their their whole platform. I mean, and that's fine. Like, that's fine if you think that way and you have a certain like methodology that you feel is, really strong. That's fine, but like, don't be respectful about it. Like, and I've unfollowed some people recently that like I thought were being dicks because a bunch of people were saying that they thought that Derrick Henry was probably like a Garrett Blunt. Like, maybe he needs some really superb blocking up front at the next level to get to the second level because he's a second level runner. And I don't think that's a negative thing. And I think he tested in the sense that it shows that he's not this great laterally explosive guy. He's a big, strong, downhill guy that, in the right system is going to be awesome. In the wrong system might just be a guy that hits the pile a lot and disappoints you. And, maybe is, Melvin Gordon-ish, but with more bulk, you know what I mean? And I think that's, not a horrible thing, but also a disappointing thing if you feel like he's the 101 on your Dynasty rookie draft or 102. You might be disappointed in the results. Now, that's my opinion. Some people disagree with me on that, but there are people that shoot down anybody that thinks that because Derrick Henry was awesome in the title game, that people, whatever, or in college football bowl games, that he's foolproof. He cannot miss because of his size and because of the way he tested.
Like, you don't have to take that personally that somebody.
No, that's the point. Like, I see that from people, and I'm like, like, dude, why would you do that? Like, grow up. Like, just understand there are different viewpoints, and that they're again, this is the part that I dislike about the community. When you're right about something, oh my God, if the community was wholly wrong, like, let's say the community was like, say 90, not even 90, say the community was like 65-70% wrong on a player, okay? The person that got it right, they're not going to get any fucking backpats. And trust me, that doesn't happen because people just don't line up to pat the back of the guy that was right in that small minority. It just doesn't happen. But because people don't want to be reminded that they were fucking wrong about this guy, this guy, this guy. Because sometimes it happens. Now, again, that falls in line with the groupthink. If people, were heavily in one corner, like, nobody wants to hear about Sankey if you were all lining up for Bishop Sankey. You're feeding at the trough of Bishop Sankey. I wasn't a Sankey guy. And granted, it was split after that happened, and Sankey sort of underwhelmed. And I still think Sankey in the right system could still be a decent. He could be no Sean Marino. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said watching him in college. He was like 2013 no Sean Moreno,
which is fine if he's in the right system. And those are the guys that sort of become better players over time. Like, and people that say you can't get better. You are who you are in college. You can never get better. Yes, you can. You can improve in certain elements. You can become a smarter runner. Waste less effort laterally and all that stuff. You can get better. Trust me, it happens. We've seen it. So if he becomes Marino, then great. Then he's valuable to you on your fantasy team at some point. When, who the hell knows? But that's what I see. So certain players like that, I don't invest in rookie dynasty drafts because I don't want to have a guy burning a hole in my bench for 2 years. I
Right.
just don't. Like 2, maybe sometimes 3 years. So, what I want to do is maybe buy that guy after year 3. If you start to see a little bit, maybe he gets cut by somebody and it gets picked up by another team, then maybe he gets a shot. And you like where he's being, whatever team picked him up, maybe you like that situation. Then you grab that guy for nothing. That's the important part to understand about finding value in your dynasty leagues and stuff like that, is a guy that maybe you saw something, and that maybe the situation that he's in now is probably much more, beneficial to him being productive down the line. So that's the sort of thing that you have to look for, not the, holding on to a hope and a dream, wishing upon a star like Jiminy Cricket. I mean, a guy, if you, Jeff Janis, listen, Jeff Janis, I think he has some talent, but I mean, how many fucking years are you going to wait for Jeff Janis? I mean, I don't think it's going to happen next year. It might, but, you're better off selling him to somebody that thinks Jeff Janis is going to blow up next year.
Yeah. No, that comes
mean,
back to trusting your intuition, like just like, and then waiting for a data point, like a new data point, like something to change. And it's like, oh, I remember, like I felt this way about the guy then. Now this new thing has happened. Now
right.
maybe, and that comes back to, again, going beyond the numbers, going beyond like, intuitions and feelings and trusting your instincts and that sort of stuff, which is, I think, really important.
Yeah, I think we if we should learn anything from history and recent history, last several years, like 2-3 years. I've sworn a lot in this podcast, like maybe too much. Sorry.
Nah, that's okay. I don't care. If anybody listening cares,
I know,
let me
it's
know.
already. I know there's already an E on this rating, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Don't let your kids listen to the Backyard Banter podcast.
The Backyard Banter.
Unless they want to be sports writers, then I guess maybe they should listen. But
yeah,
you got to grow up. Hey, you got to grow up sometimes, kids.
You gotta grow up. I think if we learned anything over the last couple of years, Matt, is that there are a lot of people, like players that come out that have physical, athletic, off the charts traits. Guys that, two guys that we, on the same team right now. Cordero Patterson and Jared McKinnon right now. I mean, 2 explosive athletes. But what are they exactly doing for your dynasty team? Not much.
Not much, yeah.
McKinnon maybe here and there if Peterson is out, if he's hurt, maybe McKinnon has a big day one day. Patterson, he's buried by lesser, no, you can say lesser, but not very good NFL talent at wide receiver, because he's just not that good at running routes yet. He's sort of just a big athlete that hasn't really put all the puzzle pieces together yet. So you have this great athlete, quote unquote, burning a hole on your bench that you're doing nothing with. And I think we learned a little bit about not falling in love with traits, but falling in love with traits plus production, plus, what we see at the combine, plus what we see on film, tying all that together and saying, I trust that this player is going to be a decent pro. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to be the next so-and-so, because we all love to make comps. And I'm Captain Comp. I know that. But we don't know that they're going to blow up in the NFL, but we know they're going to be quality NFL players. That's the least that you can hope for when you're drafting these players, because, that you want to draft the players that you most expect will be helpful to you, will score points, most likely to score points. That will be their high school yearbook underneath their name, most likely to score points for your fantasy team. That's what you want.
Yeah.
You don't want to draft like the super freak, because the super freak may never see the field, and that's, unfortunate. I mean, sometimes you're lucky, you hit the bullseye. Most of the time you don't.
Yeah, they have to go, they got to go to a situation that's conducive to that too.
Right, exactly.
And clearly, the 2 you mentioned were not. So my last question for you before we kind of wrap this up, you described to me when we were talking about doing this podcast that your role and influence in the community is, self-described as in the rear view mirror mostly. Why is that? Like, why are you kind of, like you mentioned, taking a step back a little bit? Obviously, like I loved Two Mugs podcast, and Rummy and Ray podcast is really good too. I think you're definitely a great example of somebody that, you're just another guy, but started these two killer podcasts that a lot of, big time names came on. So why now are you kind of decided to take that step back?
Just where I am in life. I know it sounds kind of lame. I mean, I'm not averse to saying, now that you and I both are on draft, day consultants, that we might not spawn a podcast and maybe do something at some point. That's something we've talked about, and it could happen. I'm not averse to that. I'm open to doing another podcast. The right kind of podcast, the right kind of information, the stuff that I'm most comfortable and happy doing. It's about being happy. Like, I think that what you're doing right now with this podcast is a good thing. I think you walk away from this probably when you're done feeling good about what you're doing.
For sure, can confirm.
Yeah, vice versa for in terms of what you're doing, in terms of what your work for NFL.com as well. Those type of things, you have to feel great about, feel happy about. I mean, I was happy doing Two Mugs and Rummy and Ray. We did, those things sort of, took their toll, and that's sort of, they kind of came to an end. Not a good or bad thing. It wasn't because like I was frustrated by it. It was just everything had its course.
Well, I can imagine Ray especially has got to be just a pain in the ass to work with.
Actually, you know what? I will say this. Ray is the anal retentive chef of podcasting. But I will say this and I say this in a good, like, loving way, because he made me do absolutely nothing but just come on to the podcast and just open my stupid pie hole and spit,
oh, that's beautiful.
Whatever. He lined everything up. He recorded it. He spliced it. He edited it. He was a G, and we had a good time. And he's going on to more work now at Roto World, and they'll be doing now, podcasts and stuff now for Roto World, because I believe Josh Norris now has started his under the Roto World banner. So they'll be doing that. They'll be doing that stuff, which is great. You guys should all
I know he's got one of us as a guest coming up soon.
Nice.
Spoiler alert, it's me.
Spoiler alert, it ain't me. I know that.
But yeah, no, I mean, I'm obviously just joking. I love Ray, but yeah, I just wanted to,
it was cool. It was cool. What we did was, and just so people know, if they hadn't listened to it, what it was basically a Vegas centric DFS podcast. And I thought what we did was kind of different. And I thought, now that I hear a lot of different podcasts, a lot of podcasts are starting to sound a little bit like that. I'm not saying they're copying us, but it's very Vegas centric in terms of DFS, which is great. A lot of that information is sort of becoming part of the mainstream and part of the talking points on getting better at playing DFS, which is awesome. And I love that. And I love that people that were industry people would tell me, hey, love the podcast this week, and send me a DM or whatever. And
for sure,
that was, I appreciated that, because there are people that been part of DFS for years, and I just sort of really still only second year into it, really. So for me, that was great, and the fact that people got something from that, and I think that's the whole point. Like with DFS, I mean, there's no perfect podcast. There's a lot of different, or fantasy in general. I think there's no perfect podcast. There's a lot of podcasts who talk about different things, and you extract certain elements from those podcasts, and then, form your own opinions and ideas. Somebody might say, this running back, when he's faced against, 3-4 teams, runs for 3.8 yards a carry, and then against 4-3 teams, he's, dropping 5.1. Oh, okay. And I heard that on that podcast, but on this podcast, I heard blah, 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 blah. He's not going to be getting the lion's share of the passing, down work and blah, blah. So you're taking all that, you're putting it together and forming your own opinions and hopefully helping yourself get better. that's kind of what the whole point is like taking a lot of different elements from the community, getting better at it, and if we imparted some of that intel into the community, then great. That I was happy to be able to do that. And I still might, again, still do that. And I might guest on podcasts like this. I have fun doing that stuff. I mean, it's always interesting for me to like talk about football with people or life in general.
Yeah.
I think that, we can all learn something from each other and be better people, hopefully try to be better people, because I'm far from a good person. I mean, I always feel like I can always be better. Again, I talked about as a survivor of abuse, I'm super hard on myself about everything. And so that's for me to do things every single day that I think is trying to improve myself a little bit more is important. And that's true of this community. I think if there's somebody out there that wants help from you, try to give them help if you can. If whether it be, hey, can you forward this article to somebody that how hard is that to do? Like you just to do a little heading, say, hey, so and so contacted me, and could you check this out? If you don't want to, that's fine if you don't have time. But I told them that I do that for you, and they're a good writer, and blah blah blah, and nice guy, and blah, whatever. And that kind of thing is nothing. It takes you 5 minutes to do, but you can open a huge door for somebody. And you now stand as an example of somebody that started out as a very young person. You're still a young person, and you've already worked your way up a ladder significantly, and I think that will continue. And you seem fairly humbled by everything, which I think is great, and I think that you should continue to feel that way. You're still young, so you're gonna be still a bit of a smart ass with people, and that's cool.
Have to be.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, because listen, that's a generational thing, and that's neat. But I also think that knowing that you've come from a certain thing, and from a certain place, and that you were able to kind of climb pretty quickly, and people recognize your talent pretty early. That's a good thing to be able to kind of stay focused and continue to push. I mean, I live vicariously through through the work of you and other people, because I'm just at a different plane in life, man. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but like when you had asked, like, why did you feel like you're in the rearview mirror and all that stuff? Because I got a goddamn good job, dude. And then like I bust my ass, but I do something that like is very super fulfilling for me. Yeah, would like anybody else, would I love to be able to like retire and sit on a beach and like paint like boats and shit? Of course. Like would I want to just sit there and drink beer and burp like you just did? Stuff like that. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, we all aspire to have that, like that perfect kind of, relaxing life, and but at the same time, I'm happy to have my role in this community, whatever that role is, and however you paint it, however you see me, that's fine. I'm comfortable being crazy Uncle Rummy. So, you know what I'm saying?
I think that what you were saying, like about how, it relates to being humble, is super important. Like I talked about in the last show with JJ, like this never stops being the coolest thing in the world. Like I never get like I never like am not blown away by the fact that like people care about what I have to say, or like the people want to read Reception Perception or listen to this podcast. Like, and I don't really talk. I'm trying to get more and more comfortable talking about like what I came from like personal experiences and how that made me kind of get started. And someday I actually do want to tell the whole story and be open and public about that, but I'm not at this point. But I think that also influences me too.
Yeah.
Like your background and your personal experiences really do come out in your work, and like the people that have gone through shit, people that have, like, I mean, I haven't had an abstention. I'm not saying like I have not had like a super tough life or anything, but like I've had periods that were struggles, and I think the people that have go through shit and come out the other end, they're grateful, to be here, in the community. They're grateful to be able to discuss. And you could just tell when somebody has a vibe of like, man, I'm just happy to be here. And I think that's something that all of the guests that I've had on have been really good in conveying, so that's something I definitely wanted you to touch on, because like you said, you've got a good real life. And I think that people on Twitter that follow us all kind of also forget that like most everybody on Twitter like has another job. Like, Waldman writes at a magazine during the day. You have a really important job, that you're not just doing fantasy stuff. Like a lot of other guys aren't doing fantasy full time. And I think it's just important to remember that it's always just important. That's why I love this podcast so much, because I get to kind of help people talk about themselves and like themselves as human beings. So yeah, definitely. I think that's really important. And, yeah, so I think we'll end it right here. But before we go, like, I just want to give you one last, chance. If there's anything else you want to convey to the audience, floor is yours before we get out of here.
Yeah, I think that, as I stated earlier, I think you really should, if you want to get into this business of fantasy football or talking about football, work hard, put some work out there, reach out to people. You have an opportunity now in an age where it's so unique. You don't have to go through channels anymore. You could put something out there on Twitter. You could reach out to somebody. There's so many great people. We talked about Sigmund Bloom. We talked about the guys over at Football Guys, Joe Bryant, and talked about Evan Silva. We talked about Josh over at 4 for 4. I mean, there's so many people that are willing, nice people, kind people that are willing to listen to what you have to say, give you an opportunity, and open a door for you. It's so unique to any other experience in any other time. And maybe that's why the old sports writers are so bitter and so angry,
right?
Because they had to sit in the locker rooms and watch guys like pee on the floor and that kind of stuff. Like it's a different time, and we're able to sort of get opportunities without having to jump through these crazy hoops and work for 10 years to get a shot. You do good work, you put it out there, people will notice it. And if you're a good person, you'll get noticed and you'll get pushed up a lot further, a lot faster. Yes. And that's the important part. Just don't be a dick. It's just so being a dick is lazy. It's so lazy. It's like, and again, for me, like I joke a lot on Twitter. I say stuff and this and that, and I'm a clown, and I love to make people laugh and all that stuff. But it's one thing to like say something funny. It's another thing to say something hurtful and stupid and disrespectful. Totally different, And it shows. Believe me, on my timeline, I see the people that do that. And a lot of times I get rid of those people on my timeline. But yeah, the people that are really out there doing good stuff and that are just kind of really interactive and funny and smart, you'll be around. Trust me, you'll be around in some way, shape, or form. It's kind of like my story. Like I'm just going to stick around like a goddamn barnacle on a boat. But, I'm happy to be that barnacle. So whatever. If you guys want me around, I'll stick around. And thanks for having me on your podcast, Matt. It's been a fun time, dude.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's my pleasure to have you. And I definitely like you around for sure. I mean, like I said, I love the podcast. And also, like, if you haven't read some of Rummy's work on Bro Jackson, talking about like his personal life and everything, you definitely should, because it's outstanding. It's really honest and great. And like your appearance on Ethan Hammerman's podcast, which is another great one, the Hammer Time podcast. If you like this podcast, you'll like that one too. Your episode on there was great. That was very meaningful. You're a very honest dude. And I hope someday you do get to retire on a beach and you can write a book about all that shit. I would read it. So again, thank you, Rummy, for coming on. And everybody that's listening, if you're enjoying the show so far, please subscribe on iTunes, leave ratings, reviews, all that sort of stuff that I'm supposed to say. It really does help us grow the podcast and everything. And I think that there's a lot that you guys can learn from these guests. So again, thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you learned something today.